Some of us, perhaps many of us, have had the great good fortune of being able to travel abroad, either on study leave or on business or vacation. Every family, every travel group, every individual has something that is a must-see on every trip. Many of us, like me, for example, make a point of visiting churches and cathedrals and monasteries in every city and town along the way. Our children would tell you that traveling with my husband, Derek, and me, they always saw every church we could find and all the grocery stores in between. Which may seem odd, but Derek always maintained that you could find out a lot about a particular country or culture by taking a look at what was on the shelves in the local market. And I'm the first to admit that there were times when we learned a lot more at the grocery store than we did at the local church. One city whose great churches and cathedrals are often visited by travelers is London. I imagine that somewhere in your travels you might have visited one called St. Martin in the Fields. It is one of the oldest churches in London. It's located on Trafalgar Square in the heart of the city. The present structure was built in 1726, although there is evidence of its origins in the 13th century. A unique feature of St. Martin in the Fields is that the original burial crypt in the basement is now something called the Cafe in the Crypt, which on their website looks to be a warm and inviting, if not somewhat unlikely, spot for afternoon tea or a quick lunch. One restaurant reviewer noted that it had a certain spooked and spicy charm, which may or may not be a selling point. Now, what might make this even less appealing, or perhaps more appealing for some, is to learn that centuries ago, when churches were left unlocked and the neighbors had a much stronger sense of ownership of the building and the grounds, the church had some trouble with the neighbors using the church basement as the local cemetery. A sign was eventually put up outside the church which read, "By order of the vestry, no one is to bring any more bodies into the basement of this church. The foundations of the church have been disrupted because of so many bodies. The stability of the building is being curiously impaired. No one is to bring a body into this basement for burial without the express approval of the vestry." On this day that we celebrate All Saints' Sunday, that story gives new meaning to the idea of our resting on the shoulders of the departed saints. Not to mention the image of the foundations being shaken or curiously impaired by those same dear departed saints. We do indeed stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us, and on this day we remember and honor all of them, perhaps especially those who have shaken the foundations of the church. Back in one of my earlier lives, I was on staff at our presbytery office. One of the many wonderful opportunities I had was to work with an ecumenical group planning the All Saints' Day community worship service. Prior to the year I arrived and ended up on the planning team, it had been the effort of the Catholic and Lutheran parishes in and around downtown Minneapolis. But for some reason, they decided to invite broader participation, and so I was there on behalf of the Presbyterians, along with someone from the United Church of Christ, the United Methodists, and the Episcopalians. At the first meeting, after we had all introduced ourselves, someone turned to me and said, "Do Presbyterians even celebrate All Saints' Day?" Well, admittedly, for a minute I had to stop and think. It's not a holy day that we have always commemorated as Protestants, but it has enjoyed a renewal in recent years in many churches as we have turned back to the New Testament understanding of the saints as referring to all those who have walked with God throughout the ages, and in particular churches, those who are examples of faith for us, the communion of saints that we hold in memory. So without letting that embarrassing moment go on too long, I was able to recover and say that yes, many of our churches celebrate All Saints' Day. And most of them do so, just as we will this morning, by reading the names of those members who have died in the last year, who are part of this community of faith, the ones on whose shoulders we stand. On this day, we are invited to remember those who have gone before us, from the saints who go marching in to those who from their labors rest, the famous as well as the anonymous, who now rest with God beyond the realm of time and space. The late Peter Gomes, who was the minister of Harvard Memorial Chapel, wrote, "Of all the Christian holidays, I find this one, in all of its senses, to be the most reassuring." He went on, "I like the idea of the great and heroic ones who have gone on before. Their names remind us that great lives were called to do great things for God. I like to think of the saints beyond not simply resting, but waiting for us to join them. They assure us of a future. And I like thinking of saints as ordinary people like ourselves, seeking to be faithful and holy, here and now." We are reminded of the importance of recognizing the saints among us, not the kind of saints that are held up on special days or prayed to for lost objects or revered in statuary or on icons. Although I was disappointed when St. Christopher fell out of favor. He was a very popular charm bracelet saint when I was in junior high school. I was sorry to see him go, along with much of my jewelry collection. And not even those that we probably all count in our litany of saints. Historic and heroic figures from Martin Luther to Martin Luther King Jr., from Mother Teresa to the Mary Jo Copelands of this world. Those who somehow inspire us to greater depths of faithfulness. I'm talking about the everyday saints, those folks who come in and out of our lives when we most need them and least expect them. The ones who roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. Those who willingly and often cheerfully take up the work that nobody else particularly wants to do. One writer has said, "Everyday saints are those who exist neither in stained glass nor in heaven, but in the rough and tumble of our daily lives." These are the saints who take seriously the commandment to love one's neighbor, but who also take seriously the words that are spoken by Jesus in this morning's gospel lesson from Luke. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Or in Peter Gomes' words, these are the everyday saints who are faithful and holy here and now. It's not an easy task, this being faithful and holy here and now, especially when we hear, "Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry now. Blessed are you who weep. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and revile you and defame you." It doesn't sound like much of a blessing. But when you stop to think about it, there's really no better prescription for sainthood than truly and genuinely loving one's neighbor, even if the neighbor turns out to be the enemy. Most of the people I would name as the everyday saints in my life have at least that much figured out. There is no better time in the life of a congregation to remember and honor our saints than during a period of transition. We have already begun a journey that may at times feel like we are wandering in the wilderness, just as our ancestors in the faith did. It may at times produce anxiety and impatience and a deep desire to keep things just the way they are, to get out of this period of uncertainty and go back to Egypt, where everything was familiar. Don't imagine that we haven't been here before. This congregation has been through any number of transitions, has weathered any number of trials and tribulations, and we're still here. And just as we did then, we will count on the stories of all the saints of this congregation to keep us focused on what's ahead when the going gets a little rough. We are also coming to Pledge Sunday next week, a time when we will bring our gifts, our pledges of financial support, our hopes for the future, a time when we might all do well to think of making or renewing our pledge to get involved in the life of the church. The time we pledge is every bit as important as the number we put on the pledge card. We talk about proportional giving of our financial resources. What about proportional giving of our time? It's a good time to honor the gifts of those who have gone before us, those who built this building, who worked to merge congregations, to establish an endowment, raise the awareness of mission giving, the saints who put in hundreds, possibly thousands of hours of labor to keep this congregation afloat through good times and bad. It is on this day that we especially need to remember and honor those saints whose shoulders we stand on, as McAllister Plymouth moves into the future that God has for us. Writer and Presbyterian pastor Frederick Buechner reminds us that On All Saints' Day, it is not just the saints of the church that we should remember in our prayers, but all the foolish ones and wise ones, the shy ones and overbearing ones, the broken ones and whole ones, the despots and tosspots and crackpots of our lives, who one way or another have been our particular fathers and mothers and saints, and whom we loved without knowing we loved them, and by whom we were helped to whatever little we may have or ever hope to have of some kind of seedy sainthood of our own. So as they go marching in, we name them and we remember them. They are the everyday saints, the faithful and holy here and now, who have taught us and encouraged us and loved us into being more than we thought we could be. They are the ones who lived years beyond their 70, and those we held in our arms barely long enough to get to know them. Think about the saints in our lives. The teacher who said, "You can do better," and the one who said, "You have an amazing talent." The coach who led us on the team because we were more than a little lacking in necessary skills, but he thought we could improve with experience. And the one who kept us off the team because we weren't ready for that level of competition. The aunt who gave us piano lessons and then gave us her piano. The mother who always said we were the best thing that ever happened to her, and the father who agreed but couldn't put it into words, so he took us to the ball game instead. They are those who stood by us and stood beside us, who stood behind us and stood in our place when we couldn't stand at all. The older sister who faced down the 5th grade bully and who continues to take on the bullies of the world. The friend who went with you to the juvenile detention center when that child was picked up for possession and who let you cry all the way home. They are those everyday saints who speak the truth and who help us hear it. The nurse who said, "Your mother is dying," and the hospital chaplain who gathered you all in prayer around her bed. The doctor who said, "The news isn't good," and in the same breath, "But we're a long way from the end of the road." They are the friends who hold us up and occasionally have to hold us back. The one who brought the casserole over when the dog died and always remembers your birthday with flowers. And the one who reminded you that you were once 16 years old and grounding her for the rest of her life wasn't going to help your mother-daughter relationship. They walk with us through the darkest valleys, and they talk us through the dark nights of our souls when we can't find God anywhere. They pray for us, and they pray with us. They hold our secrets, and they hold our hands. They laugh with us until we can't catch our breath and share our happiness without envy or resentment. They are faithful and holy here and now. And so we tell their stories, foolish and wise, shy and overbearing, broken and whole, all part of who we are. We write them on our hearts. We recite them to our children so that the mind and memory of the community remains unbroken from generation to generation. We remember those whose names we will read and those who are named only in our hearts. On this All Saints' Day, when we remember and give thanks, it is for all of those saints as well. Thanks be to God. Amen.